By far, one of the most important events in House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire is the Great Council of 101. During the prosperous reign of Old King Jaehaerys the Conciliator, most of his children and heirs died for one reason or another. The two which are of the most concern, and the reason this council was even held in the first place, were his two eldest sons, Aemon and Balon. Aemon was the firstborn son, though not the king's firstborn child. King Jaehaerys actually had a daughter named Daenerys, who was older than Aemon, but ultimately died when she was still a child. But even before her death, despite her being older and his wife Alysanne's insistence, King Jaehaerys did not make his firstborn child his heir. Instead, he proclaimed his son Aemon as his heir, pushing the narrative that a son comes before a daughter, a precedent that he continued even after his oldest son's death. Aemon Targaryen was the father of Rhaenys, the queen who never was, and he died fighting Myrish pirates when he wasn't on his dragon Caraxes. After his death, despite Rhaenys being his only child and the old king's eldest descendant, Jaehaerys passed over her in favor of his second son, Balon the Brave, once again choosing a son over a daughter. But things got tricky when Balon died. After the sudden death of his second son due to burst belly, Jaehaerys was at a crossroads on who his heir should be. And this is the first conflict we're introduced to in House of the Dragon. In the show, it's framed as Viserys versus Rhaenys, man versus woman. Should the king's eldest descendant rule or his eldest male descendant? But in the books, this was different. This conflict wasn't simply between Viserys and Rhaenys. There were 14 claims that were heard, but the only two that were really considered were that of Viserys and Rhaenys' son, Laenor. She wasn't even considered during this, but the show goes out of its way to push the idea of man versus woman, because Westeros and its king are heavily biased towards men in this society. But the Great Council offered a means of veering away from that path, to spin the wheel in a different direction. But we all know the Lords of the Realm, at least the majority of them, decided to keep it spinning the way it had been for hundreds of years. Despite having a legitimate claim to the Iron Throne, being the only child of the king's firstborn son, and being his eldest living descendant on top of that, the Lords chose Viserys over Princess Rhaenys, all on the account of gender. Because as Otto says,
"It wouldn't matter if she were Jaehaerys himself, born again. Rhaenyra is a woman."
As a result of having her claim passed over, Rhaenys was then styled as the queen who never was. But what if this was different? What if, during the Great Council of 101, the realm decided to diverge from the path it had been treading for hundreds of years? What if, in a time before Rhaenyra Targaryen, a woman was chosen to sit the Iron Throne? What if, instead of being the queen who never was, Rhaenys was the queen who was? What if Rhaenys Targaryen was the first ruling queen of Westeros? We'll set the stage in Episode 0, a time before House of the Dragon. The year is 101 AC, and Old King Jaehaerys has called a Great Council at Harrenhal. After the death of his two eldest sons, the Conciliator is at a crossroads. Most of his children have either died, been estranged and disinherited like his daughter Sarah, or have no interest in the throne or politics like his son Vaegon. With his life nearing its end, it's imperative that he find someone to succeed him when he passes. So when the council begins, 14 claims are heard, but only 2 are taken seriously. Viserys Targaryen, the eldest son of his second son, Balon the Brave, who he chose as heir after the death of his oldest son Aemon, his oldest living male descendant, and Rhaenys Targaryen, the eldest and only child of his firstborn son Aemon, his eldest living descendant, and a woman. Jaehaerys has let it be known throughout his reign that he prefers a son to a daughter, passing over Rhaenys in favor of his second son. But now, Balon is dead, and despite her gender, Rhaenys has some influence and support in the realm. And this is exactly why he called this council, the fear of a potential civil war between his descendants over his decision. For that reason, he leaves it in the hands of the Lords of the Realm. They will choose their next ruler today, and soon the vote comes in. Maesters ascend the steps to where Jaehaerys resides, and present him with the ruling. The king looks it over, unfurling the message before making his announcement. It is declared by all lords paramount and all lords vassal that the Princess Rhaenys Targaryen be named Princess of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne. Some are stunned by the news of a woman inheriting, while others applaud. Corlys Velaryon looks very proud. squeezing Rhaenys' hand as a grin works its way onto his face. He's not only Lord of the Tides now, he's Prince Consort, and one day, King. His children and descendants will be royalty and monarchs. Rhaenys can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at the way things turned out. After her father died and she was passed over for her uncle, she was the first to combat this decision. Something as small-minded as gender shouldn't have a say in whether or not she had the right to rule. She saw this from the start, and now the realm did too, though she was sure that some would need more convincing. But right now, that doesn't matter. The throne that would have belonged to her father, the birthright that was taken from her, is hers once again, as it should have always been. Off to the side, Emma pats Viserys on the shoulder, sorry for the disappointing outcome for her husband. But Viserys himself isn't too concerned. He never really wanted to be king, not even in the canon timeline. It was always something that just happened to fall on him, and he rolled with the punches as best as he could because it was his duty. But at heart, he just wanted to play with his Legos. So Rhaenys is more than welcome to the Iron Throne. But with that being said, a conversation needs to be had regarding her and her heirs. Rhaenys will be queen. This is an irrefutable fact now. But she is a Targaryen, and her husband is a Velaryon. So are her children. So, like in the canon timeline, it does become a question of which family name will carry on the crown. The children are named Velaryon, so if Laena or Laenor were to take the throne, would that mean that the Velaryons were now the ruling family of Westeros? It's a similar dilemma to the canon timeline, where Rhaenyra marries Laenor and Corlys asks that their children will be born Velaryon, since they are still going by Westerosi law and tradition, and Rhaenyra is a woman. Viserys comes to a compromise that when the children are born, they will be Velaryons, but when the oldest comes of age and ascends to the Iron Throne, they will do so under the name Targaryen. I imagine a similar conclusion will be reached with Jaehaerys. Though there are other Targaryens around to continue the family line, like Viserys and Daemon, the old king isn't going to go for the idea that the Velaryons should replace the Targaryens as the ruling family of Westeros. Dragons will reign for hundreds of years more. But with this in mind, it does bring up another question. With Rhaenys now being Princess of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne, if anything should happen to her, who's going to be her heir? Well, so far she has two candidates, Laena and her brother Laenor. Normally, if this was just regular Westeros, the male would take precedence, but since the Iron Throne is now passing on regardless of gender, we have to consider age instead. In the show, I'm fairly sure that Laena and Laenor are twins, just because of how similar in age that they look. And I would even dare to say that in the show, Laenor looks just a little bit older than Laena, at least when they're kids. And with the way Laena holds on to him when she gets scared during the tournament, it does give me the vibe that he might be older as well. And yes, I am aware that sometimes older sisters will still go to their younger brothers for comfort and protection too, but it reads to me at least that he may be older in the show. Although, in the books, Laena is actually older than Laenor by 2 years. But I really doubt that that carries over into the show because Laena is around 15, if I'm not mistaken, when her brother marries Rhaenyra. And Laenor doesn't look like he's 13. But maybe I'm just overanalyzing, so we'll just meet in the middle since my what-ifs are more geared towards following the show than the books. We'll say that the two are twins from how things look in the show, but Laena is the older twin, meaning she came out before Laenor did. This would make her Rhaenys' oldest child, and by law, her heir. So, Laena Velaryon will one day become Laena Targaryen. This actually works out pretty well since there won't be any stress when it comes to Driftmark. Laenor will only be Lord of the Tides, not Lord of the Tides and Protector of the Realm. Though that does have a nice ring to it if I'm being honest. And even if that were the case, if they were to get concerned about him taking on too much, they could just end up having more children. At the time of the Great Council of 101, Rhaenys was actually around 27 years old, at least in the books, so she's not too old yet. And I'm sure that this would be a conversation that both Rhaenys and Corlys have together because both of their children would be in line to inherit the Iron Throne now. So there will be questions of what if something happened to either of them before their time. More specifically, what if something were to happen to Laenor? What would happen to Driftmark? Who would inherit it? Laena may be heir to Rhaenys, but just because the lords voted for the throne to pass on regardless of gender, doesn't mean that they signed off on men and women inheriting equally throughout Westeros. So for the time being, the Iron Throne is just a special case. Still, this would be the least of their problems. the most important being securing their rule after the death of Jaehaerys, since there will be those who believe that Viserys is the rightful king, like Otto Hightower. He served as Hand of the King to Jaehaerys for the last 2 years of his reign, and we know how he feels about women inheriting. Then there's Daemon. He's always been the most rambunctious of Balon's sons, and he might believe his brother was unfairly looked over. After all, he was the eldest son of the Prince Balon, the man Jaehaerys had chosen himself to be heir after Aemon's death. He might feel the throne rightfully belongs to them since their line was chosen by the old king directly, not some gaggle of lords and outsiders without a hint of Valyrian blood. So the future queen and king consort are going to need to keep their eyes open and do what they can to secure their reign without a problem. And they have the remaining 2 years of Jaehaerys' reign to prepare themselves for this. So Rhaenys and her family relocate to Dragonstone as she prepares herself to take the Iron Throne. For the time being, Vaemond is left in charge of Driftmark, with his brother coming back periodically to check up on things. Rhaenys also heads to court from time to time, to really familiarize herself with the people and make sure they get used to her presence. Maybe from time to time she even fills in for Jaehaerys on certain things. She is the heir after all. She needs to know how to make decisions on her own. She'll want to assert her dominance as heir sooner rather than later, so people won't be able to try anything on her. And this may rub Otto a certain way since as Hand, he acts on the king's authority, and most likely it's vying for Viserys to take the throne and not Rhaenys. But he's going to have a hard time pushing Viserys to do something like this. It was voted by the realm that Rhaenys would be queen, and Jaehaerys has accepted that. So has Viserys. Despite being a weak and indecisive man on certain things, one thing is clear. Viserys cares for his family, even if he doesn't treat all of its members equally.
My only child.
So, convincing him to take up arms against Rhaenys is not going to happen. Viserys isn't Aegon, a child that's been manipulated and abused for years, so hungry for love and acceptance and acknowledgement that the cheering of thousands could make him want to be king. I could see Otto potentially understanding this and possibly relenting in his endeavor at some point, because this is what he almost does in canon. At least that's how it seems to me. When Aegon is born, Vizzy T refuses to change the succession from his daughter to his son, and Otto seems resigned to this fact until his older brother Hobart makes an appearance and tells him to do otherwise.
It only remains for Viserys to name him heir to the throne.
I wouldn't be so sure.
He's the king's firstborn son.
I don't know that His Grace sees it so clearly.
Then it lies with you to make him see it, Lord Hand.
And even then, he doesn't immediately plan to usurp Rhaenyra. He wants Aegon to marry her so their claims can come together. It's only after this fails and falls through does he really start planning to make Aegon the king. So he could give it up or he could make it a problem. It could go either way. But as time passes, the old king's health declines, and soon King Jaehaerys is dead. The realm grieves the loss of such a great and honorable king. And now, without any real competition, his granddaughter ascends to his throne. The coronation is held in the Dragon Pit, filled to the brim with common folk, thousands of people. The royal family is surrounded by knights, Kingsguard, and Valyrian soldiers. Meleys flies overhead outside, and Valyrian ships surround the city, a display of power to all who might dare to oppose this. Rhaenys is anointed by a septon of the faith, and given the crown of her late grandfather. Her children look on happily, and her husband can't help but look proud and satisfied as she rises. Rhaenys Targaryen, the first of her name, Queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lady of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, the first ruling queen of Westeros. And to commemorate this special occasion, she resists the Targaryen urge to senselessly slaughter thousands of people for no good reason, and instead takes her dragon Meleys for a victory lap around the city. And when she returns to the cheers of her family, noblemen and common folk alike, she makes her first announcement as queen. She is pregnant with her third child by Corlys Velaryon. Once again, the realm rejoices, but it's brief as with the ascension of Rhaenys, some serious questions need to be asked. Rhaenys is the first of her kind, a ruling queen who is going otherwise uncontested. She was selected by the lords of the realm, and her cousins, at least Viserys, have no interest in taking that away from her. But with a woman ascending to a seat of power like the Iron Throne, it does beg the question, does this mean that other women would be allowed to inherit like this as well? As I mentioned earlier on in the video, the Iron Throne is a special case for the time being. The vote the Lords of the Council participated in only pertained to the Iron Throne, not Westeros as a whole. But the question would still come anyway, most likely in the form of petitions from other noble ladies. Seeing that a woman rose to nigh absolute power will make them think that they should have the chance as well, and wonder if the grace shown to Rhaenys would also be extended to them. This is also an issue Rhaenyra would probably have to deal with should she ascend to the Iron Throne uncontested. Now, we with our modern brains will say, of course women should have the right to inherit. It's stupid that they're denied such things simply on the account of their gender. And Rhaenys may even agree with this line of thinking, since in episode 1, when Rhaenys tells Rhaenyra about how the realm prefers men to women, Rhaenyra says that she'll make a new order when she's queen, and Rhaenys responds that she wishes that that could be true.
When I'm queen, I will create a new order.
Oh, I wish that could be Rhaenyra.
Now, that sounds very pleasant, but you have to remember, this is not the modern world. This is Westeros. And even monarchs are not immune to fire and blood. That's one of the most common ways people will get what they want in this world. That's how Aegon and his sisters took Westeros and made it their own, not through inheritance or by law, but by fire and blood. Conquest. Because people wouldn't just accept some random guy coming around and saying, hey, I'm the king, you will kneel. This would be the issue with Rhaenys suddenly saying that all women could inherit equally to men. Imagine, only half the population is allowed to hold lands and titles, and only that half of the population has claims to these lands and titles and holdings and resources that have been in their family for generations. By allowing women to inherit, you would effectively double the amount of claimants to these things. And once these other claimants know that they have the right to claim something, like most people in Westeros, they're going to want it. You'll have lords who have older sisters, and since it's been decreed that gender no longer matters, when it comes to inheritance, you'll have women trying to take titles from their brothers, since technically they are the oldest child, and gender doesn't give you special privileges anymore. And not to mention, some of these women who were probably married off to other lords because they weren't able to inherit, may even have their husbands fighting for them. Since if their wife now had a strengthened claim to a place like Storm's End, for instance, if they took it for them, then that would make them Lord of Storm's End by default through them. So by immediately claiming that women can inherit equally to men, you could potentially start many smaller civil wars between women and their husbands, who want what they believe is rightfully theirs, and brothers who refuse to give up the lands and titles that were pretty much promised to them from birth by the previous laws and their fathers. You'd essentially start smaller versions of what's happening between Rhaenyra and Aegon, just without the dragons. So just offloading all of this power all at once would not be a good thing for Westeros. If Rhaenys is serious about changing the system, I would say the best bet isn't giving women the right to inherit right out of the gate. The best bet would probably be giving them a gradual increase in their influence over the realm. Make it so women can now be knighted, women can join the City Watch, give them positions at court aside from just being servants, give them positions on the small council based on the skills that they can provide. Gradually introduce these changes every few months or every year or so things don't feel like they're moving too fast for the people of Westeros to adapt. Get them used to being in charge, and the men used to having them so. So that way, when she wants to pass a law of female inheritance, it won't be so sudden. Maybe even pass the rule for the next generation of aspiring lords and ladies. Or the one after that. So a new mindset can take root in a younger, more impressionable generation that will have less issue adopting it. This, of course, is bound to ruffle some feathers, though. Lords won't like these changes, and Rhaenys' reign will probably start to look more like Aegon V's. Aegon V, also known as Aegon the Unlikely, was a Targaryen king who advocated for the small folk. After spending time undercover with the Hedge Knight, later on his commander of the Kingsguard Sir Duncan the Tall, Aegon got to see how the common folk lived firsthand, and as a result, when he became king, he did his best to make their lives a bit better, by passing laws that would help them out. This, of course, didn't fly well with some lords. This will happen with Rhaenys. But unlike Aegon V, she has dragons, a powerful naval fleet, and plenty of soldiers at her side. So if anyone wanted to stand against her on this, she would have no problem enforcing her will. Because of this, some people may try and get in Viserys' head to usurp Rhaenys, but once again I doubt he'll do anything when it comes to this. He hates conflict and has never been a man for war. This could lead some people to go to Daemon for support, since he is more active than his brother. But whether he agrees to do so or not depends on whether or not he wants to betray Viserys. If he takes the throne from Rhaenys for himself, he'd effectively be passing over his brother's claim. And if his brother doesn't want the throne and supports Rhaenys, does that mean that they would have to be enemies? Would he really want to fight his older brother? And would someone like Otto even support Daemon as king, because even before Viserys was crowned, they didn't exactly like each other? So, the way I see things is Rhaenys could be a strong queen. She's not indecisive like Viserys. She knows what she wants. But she's not so impulsive like Daemon and Rhaenyra that she would do things in the moment that could reflect badly on her. But that's not to say her reign will go unchallenged. There will be men who believe wholeheartedly that the throne should pass to the sons of Balon, disagreeing with Rhaenys' reforms for women. But whether war breaks out really just depends on people like Daemon and Otto. Would they really be willing to start that fight? Otto doesn't have a daughter who is queen. She's too young. Nor does he have grandchildren who are dragon riders and conditioned from a young age to hate the opposition. So I think he'd sooner be removed as hand of the king for conspiracy than actually be able to mount a feasible rebellion. And while I'm sure Daemon would garner support, I don't think he'd want to fight against his brother should he side against him in favor of Rhaenys. But in all honesty, this is just a fragment of what could change in this world with Rhaenys being made queen. One change I didn't even get to mention earlier is that Aemma may also get to live longer in this alternate timeline. Since Viserys isn't the king, he won't be so pressured to have a son and make Aemma conceive so much. With less stress on her body in this timeline, she'd probably stop after having Rhaenyra, or maybe have an easier time delivering other children since she's not being impregnated so often. She may be able to live to see her daughter grow into a woman. And so could Viserys. Since he's not the king, he won't be getting cut so often by the Iron Throne. He won't rot from the inside out, and maybe he'll actually be able to enjoy his life a bit more this time around. He can just be the family man he wanted to be, while Rhaenys does all the heavy lifting. But there is one more question. In the canon timeline, as king, Viserys was often plagued with dragon dreams. The one that plagued him the most was of a son that ascended to the Iron Throne. He was obsessed with this dream, and it drove him for so many years. But now, in this timeline, Viserys is not king. Rhaenys is queen. But assuming he is still a dragon dreamer, it does make you wonder, what could he possibly be dreaming about now? Who knows? But that's all for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.